perhaps, as we explore this vow that we have freely and blessedly chosen to embrace, that we allow this time together to be a prayer. To be a prayer that the unity that we are blessed to experience and share and complement, the ideal that allows us to pursue unity in diversity, that this same blessing might be poured out, especially on the people who are experiencing conflict, nations that are experiencing conflict. The format that we will use for this afternoon's presentation is conversational, and I will be presenting first the questions that we fielded and which we received from you, those of you who inserted a question when you registered. And before moving on to another level, I will pause to see if there might be some questions that have arisen in the meantime. We'll field questions both from those of you who are here present as well as those of you participating via webinar. Please feel free to type your questions in and we'll make sure they get represented. At this time, I would like to present our presenter, Father Thomas McClain, who will be sharing some reflections on our theme, the vow of poverty, and how it can be expressed in a macro global economy. Father Tom joined the Jesuits after finishing high school and taught high school for 2 years, and then obtained a degree in theology, followed by a master's in German literature at the University of California at Berkeley. After ordination, he served in various roles in Jesuit high schools, then as assistant for secondary education for the Jesuit Detroit province, and as province treasurer. He served as pastor of an Ann Arbor parish, and as the director of Catholic campus ministry at the University of Michigan. And after this, he was called to serve as general treasurer of the Society of Jesus in Rome, and he's occupied that role since 2010. So I don't know if any of you noticed, but Father Tom does not come with degrees in economics, finance, or accounting, but like most of us in religious life, what we studied is not exactly what we end up doing. And I'm sure all of you can relate to that in some way or another. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that we can assume that most of us here also do not have degrees in finance, accounting, or economics. So we find ourselves in very, very good company. The questions that we received, all of them do focus on the understanding and living of the vow of poverty. And I noticed some division. Some were at the personal level, others were at the institutional level, and then there were others at the social and ecclesiastical level. So that's how we'll frame the conversation today. So we'll begin with the personal level. How can the vow of poverty be lived on the personal level in a way that's life-giving and respectful of the differences lived as a result of living in multicultural circumstances?
Well, you made a mistake of asking me Jesuit a question, and presumably I'm going to start where you want to start, because I don't think you can talk about poverty on the personal level without having some sense of the context on which the person lives in. So, as you begin with your comments about how we do this in a global economic structure, I think we have to begin to ask our sisters, our brothers, to live the vow of poverty in a global economic context. I've said to people before that in the history of the vow of poverty, when it was initially conceived of for religious life, it was done in the context of an agrarian economy. So we began to start creating methods of living the vow relative to how the world functioned. And in those areas, you couldn't save things, you didn't have banks, you didn't have ways of preserving. And the focus was very local. I find it interesting that in our own constitutions, we do not have a treasurer, we have a procurator. And that word tells me kind of everything. That was the person that procured what we needed to get through the winter. And it was focused on the local community, what we needed to make it through. And the community had to survive. It began in the monasteries. The monasteries had to be self-sufficient. Then as models of religious life began to expand to mendicant orders, to apostolic communities, they had to take that local survival and translate it, and with rules and practices that focused on my living from my community and my community's assets. I kind of joke about this. So if the procurator's job was to get you through the winter, what two qualities did you need in the procurator, the treasurer? Stingy and secretive. If I told you how much I had, you'd want it. And if I gave you too much, I wouldn't get you through the winter. So unfortunately, treasurers, bursars, procurators developed this reputation of being stingy and secretive. But now we're in a world where things have shifted. And we're in much more of a global macroeconomy where, first of all, you can save with a long-term vision. You can put money in the bank. You can save for the future. You can strategize. Where before that was not possible much beyond the end of winter. And secondly, communication has changed our abilities to be aware not only of my community, but then to be aware of the larger context. The sharing of goods, the ability to communicate where there is surplus and where there is need has kind of developed. But I want to go back to this agrarian economy. We developed a spirituality then as I depended on the local community and I chose to live simply. We spiritualize that because, we don't want to be similar to the poor, like the poor. This is a dangerous topic because you all have different charisms and spirituality of poverty. So, you have to kind of adjust this to your own spirituality. But we developed a spirituality that was my simplicity, and I wanted to be simplicity for the sake of my local community, for the sake of my local community that was apostolic, to supporting the apostolate. But we kind of had the thing about being poor was kind of being good. And maybe in an agrarian economy that had some symbolic value. But now we're in a global world, global macro. And I put out there for consideration that the motive for my being poor, so to your question of personal poverty, is in the context of my commitment to the global needs and that I live simply and with less, so that those who do not may have from my surplus. The surplus in the past was something we kind of, the local community kind of saved for itself, and, maybe we could renovate the house, or maybe we could buy a little vacation house, or maybe we could give more money to the apostolate, even if the apostolate didn't need it. But now, as we see in so many of the documents, in this document on the economy at the service of the mission, what I find the most important part of it really is the beginning, where we talk about the vow of poverty, and we begin to hear Francis's approach creeping in here. He talks about the global need, and to be aware of something beyond my local community. And I think in a consumerist society, parenthesis, I got to admit here that my bias has got to be from the developed North. My experience is not from the developing Southern Hemisphere, where I am not as equipped to speak to a spirituality of that culture living a vow of poverty, close parenthesis. But from that context of the society that is consumerist, and where the society consumes, and if something's left over, maybe I'll think about giving it to those in need. Is it a more meaningful witness in that society that there are men and women who vow themselves to live simply so that others may have from my surplus? And if that's the context that we give evangelical witness, then that really forms a whole kind of like paradigm shift on how we govern, on how we are transparent. Because it makes no sense for the individual woman or man religious to live simply so others may have need if there is no trust in the structure to make that allocation of our surpluses, of our riches, to the very real needs and priorities, A, of our congregation, or B, of the local church, or the church worldwide. I have a tendency to want to rehabilitate Judas. There are two moments where Judas gives us an insight into the way the community of the apostles with Christ lived. The first insight is at the washing of the feet and the oil that Mary did for Jesus. And Jesus said, wait a minute. Shouldn't that oil have been sold and the money given to the poor? Or if you go to the Last Supper, when suddenly Judas was gone, the scripture says, either he went out to get something for the meal or to share our money with the poor. Well, that gives us a very clear insight of how they lived. That whatever they had, they lived in such a way that they gave what they did not need or their surplus to the poor. It's the only place that I find the dynamic of that early group in Scripture telling us how they managed their resources. But then Judas also gives us the image to see how we as individual persons can use the theory, oh no, we're doing this living simply, but then really using it for myself. Judas reminds us that we have to be men and women of integrity in terms of the theory, the context in which we want to live our vow of poverty. And that's how I actually choose to put that in my life. So, to your question, I think it comes back to that. If we accept the shift in the model that the world is living in, And that is the dynamic that we as men and women vowed in religious life to abolish poverty have to live. Do we need to find ways of shifting and communicating to our communities, to our congregations, a different way of using our resources and how they participate and make it real? To me, I think it's a much more important witness, but how we witness it to the world is also a very important thing. You know, that we live less for the good of sharing our excesses for others. We don't want to get into bragging. I don't know how we do that witness. But then again, I think we have to struggle how we do that witness when we are men and women religious with large institutions and houses that provide us 3 meals a day and I mean, the same paradigm, not paradigm shift, but change difficulty is in both models. But I think the model of living less so that others may have more gives much more evangelical witness to the world at large. In the developing world, as I think about this, they are, or those men and women who we have in the developing world, who we have sent to serve marginalized people where there is no income for them. How they live about poverty, I think, is also how one, in humility, accepts the gift of others, and how one respects that gift, and also making sure that it does profit the needy that are being served. I really have to say that it has not really been part of my personal experience to be in that kind of situation. But I see it in my brothers in different parts of the world where, you know, they are struggling just to meet costs for formation, costs for supporting the apostles, and depending on the charity of others. So Bernadette, that's kind of an initial kickoff to your first question.
Yes, and I'd like to kick off on your bringing up the Judas element, because come up in one of the questions, there are some very cultural connected issues related to the use of money. And for example, the comment of Judas of having such a gift not being used at the service of the poor, but rather being used by the institute, you know, by this group, somehow in some cultures can be seen as a misuse when someone has a vow of poverty. So there are cultural issues that come into play. So one of the questions was, are there some universals about the vow of poverty? I get the sense that sometimes we're looking for a script, black and white rules that will guide us through this extremely complex reality that we're living. When we do have an ideal that we're living that has an historical background, like you say, but at the same time, we're living it at the global level now, where there are so many different cultural understandings of the use of money, and perhaps then what the vow of poverty, how the vow of poverty will be expressed.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the whole understanding of the vow of poverty comes out of a Eurocentric birth. I mean, it comes out of that kind of and the monastic life and so on and so forth. You know, we had that spirituality, and it was just so strong, you know, that you left your family. You know, you cut yourself off from the world. You entered religious life. You know, we have those images. Well, first of all, the monasteries, you know, and contemplative life, and you know, not visiting with your families but once a year. You know, that was certainly the model we had in Europe, you know, our world that found its way then over to North America. But when you have cultures where the family is so strong and the power of the tribe is so dominant in one person's life, how do you impose a sense of, let's forget religious life because we're supposed to have poverty, how do you sense a sense of community? Poverty is ultimately a communal experience, you know, that I rely on the community for my resources. But I'm in a culture where the expectation is so strong that
that I have an obligation to the family, and the family is described in many different ways. There are cultures where my daughter is a friend, not my daughter. Or my sister is, you know, someone that I have lived with, but really is no blood relationship, and my obligation to that. You know, I think that is challenging for religious life, how one balances that sense of the vow of poverty says that I throw my lot in common with the group, and how then I translate that to the culture where also it makes it difficult for me to understand the cutting off from family. Service of people. So I don't think there's an answer, you know, other than to admit that there's a difficulty there. And then how a congregation that finds itself in both hemispheres then begins to identify a common sense of poverty is something that's important.
Are there any questions that have come up at this point? I have one. Okay.
I have one from Caroline. What is the difference between a treasurer and a procurator?
I don't know if I bring a tradition where I have a constitution where there is no treasurer, but I'm the treasurer. So, I mean, yeah, I think in the past, you know, we now have the procurator who is basically our canon lawyer. So you've got so many different uses of that word procurator today. Many congregations, the procurator. Remember, at least here in Rome, the government was the church. So the procurator dealt with the external matters, and the law system was canon law. It was the church law, you know. And so we saw this was the outside dealing person. You know, we found ourselves having to divide the canonical issues from the financial issues of legal matters in our own civil societies, handling banking systems, handling contracts in the non-existent papal states anymore. And so I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time worrying about, you know, why the shift in name. I think we're going from a canonical function that still has to exist in all of our congregations. We need someone who can handle the canonical law issues and, you know, things taking alienations and taking dismissals and all that stuff, and working that with the Vatican, and then civil matters that are external to it.
Anybody here have a question? If not, we can move to the institutional level.
Was that an agreement or just?
Hot topic. Okay. Since we did have a question regarding the treasurer, maybe we could start there. One of the questions regards the connection between the vow of poverty and the ministry of treasurer, which in this case we have a member of the community directly handling the finances of the community. How would you see that role today being lived?
Well, you touched the button. First of all, the person who's responsible for the finances of the community or the province or the congregation is not the treasurer, it's the superior. And you've got to keep that in mind. Now, we've all got our control issues going on here. But I think that's very important to remember, and it's very important that the treasurer be aware of that. Well, let's go back to the introduction that we had about my background. I've never studied accounting, never studied finance, economics. But I was the president of the high school, I was principal of the school, I ran a parish,
And in that, working with talented and qualified laymen and women, I developed an expertise in managing things, and planning. And I don't think that we can or should require that major superiors or superiors be experts in finance. You know, sometimes we need a person who can articulate our mission well and inspire and lead and have a vision. We turn to theologians, we turn to spiritual directors, we turn to those who have developed an expertise to articulate and lead and have an ability to work well with people, but may not have a clue about managing. And those people, all major superiors, need someone to assist them with management issues. So, you know, my defense of my appointment as general treasurer is that there's a paradigm shift in the role of the treasurer from, in the past, in the agrarian society, money in, money out. Pretty simple job. And also management issues for superiors and major superiors was much more simple in those days. But now you need someone who doesn't spend all their time at the computer paying bills, doing payroll. Is that a good use of a religious treasurer? As opposed to a religious who has a spirit of our own vow of poverty and our own tradition and spirituality of poverty, who can take the data and with that tee up, prepare for superiors, strategies and opportunities in the planning and the visioning of the community, of the association, the congregation. I think we need to accept the fact that the talents and the skill of laymen and women to assist us in that, who can bring those technical skills to us. A good manager can establish appropriate supervisory controls without being the technician, and then free him or herself up to do the strategic thinking and develop opportunities that the major superior does not have time for. Unfortunately, because of that model, you know, the major superior has to come with that understanding of that need and call for that kind of help. I don't know about your communities, but sometimes in mine, with the appointment of provincial comes all knowledge and all power and don't try to tell me anything, you know. But that goes with the paradigm shift. It's stop thinking about poverty as living cheaply, not spending money. We're not thinking about just getting through the year. The treasurer makes sure we get through the year. But I need the person that can help us think long-term and strategize for the future of my local community, for the future of our congregation or our province. And then we get into this argument that costs so much money, and hire someone to the other word. But if we don't have the support staff to help those people do that, then in a long time, we don't plan, we don't care for our assets, we'll find ourselves in trouble. So, going back to your question, I think we have to update our understanding of the role of treasurer, strengthen the awareness and the skills as we appoint people as major superiors or superiors, in what are the responsibilities of overseeing the finances or the resources of the community, and what kind of help that they need, what we can offer them to help them do this. But I call this the treasurer the CFO. He's the one, she's the one who does the strategic planning, gathering the information from those who are doing the tasks of accounting and paying the bills and banking.
So then, what should an institute look for in a treasurer? And also, what type of preparation do you think should be provided to someone that an institute is looking at in providing the role of treasurer for today? Not only because we know, I mean, looking at the statistics, someone going to university now, by the time they're graduating, what they've learned is outdated, and that's affecting us as well. So not only in terms of what we need now, but what that person is going to be requested to do in the very near future.
Well, no, it's not just what course should they take. Part of being a treasurer, I would say, is not simply book knowledge, but is experiential knowledge. So I think part of it is, to what extent do we build into our formation and our ongoing formation, giving people experiences, supervised experiences of managing things, or exposing them to opportunities to be involved in management discussions. I say frequently to people in our society that, look for young religious to appoint to committees and boards of trustees, so that they're familiar with the kinds of questions that are being asked. Or we have a tradition where province treasurer is supposed to visit the houses and the works to get a sense of their finances. Well, you can just as easily ask a young religious to kind of go and ask those questions and come back and sit down and talk over with the treasurer. This is what I found. What did you ask about this? Well, how are they doing this? To expose them to some of the management issues that relate to how we live our poverty and to how we manage well the resources that we have. And to help them understand the frustration of human relationships that happen in all of that, and that superior doesn't talk to that person, and it goes on and on. So I think, first of all, it's relationship. I have frequently where, I talk to a provincial in one of our developing countries who needs a treasurer, sent them off to the United States to get an MBA. Because the model of business that he may encounter in an MBA in a university in the United States will never translate in the current model to the country in which he serves. Yet, should he spend time with experienced managers in his own culture, developing good principles of how I negotiate in an economy where I cannot count on stability of government or the stability of receiving materials for a building project, far different from someone who is dealing with labor contracts and unions and in another culture. So, it's looking at our long-term formation programs. To what extent do we, in the assignments that we give people, do we ask that they also be given experiences in management, And it can be the simple thing of managing a fundraiser in a grade school. Those things, How do I balance the book? How to make reports? And those things. So they're out there. So people begin to accept responsibility for programs, directing them, get evaluated in them, and develop a sense of that. So that's those are different aspects of how we can kind of build that in. But frequently, the pressure is, we have to send someone here to do this job, and we need to fill posts. And sometimes we're not thinking long term of we need to develop skills in these people beyond what we've always done: the ability to pray, the ability to work. The other elements of our own formation program, but it's Mother Superior to care of it.
Before we move off the topic of the role of the treasurer, are there any questions that have come up?
I have a question. I have a question online from Ines. How do you see the world poverty in the context of Laudato Si, where Pope Francis calls for a conversion of our style of life?
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying to you earlier about I live in a way so that others may have more. That also works for the world too. That I live in a way so that as I live with less, as I damage less, as I consume less, I have a less of a negative, I can have a less of a negative effect on the environment and on the use of our resources, so that the world is available for those in the future, not those who have less, but those who follow us through. There are other strategies that we have, but I think those are beyond just the simple matter of our personal lifestyle choices. It's, how we use our assets to affect change on behalf of the environment or on behalf of the poor. We just had this document that came out yesterday from the Congregation of the Faith and from the Dicastery for Human Integrity and Human Development that begins to address the issues of the economic world. It too pushes the global issues, but it also asks us to reflect on how we use our assets. We are all familiar with different kinds of patterns of using social responsibility principles in the way we invest our resources. There's also a document in process that will really speak to that whole issue of socially responsible investing for Catholic institutions. But even in that, I think we can have a very positive impact, as Francis calls us, on the environment in two ways. We've all been very much aware of the discussion on the whole issue of fossil fuels and divesting of those as a pattern that some have chosen. Another pattern is choosing to put our money, our investments, in terms of a positive impact into those entities that are seeking to redress the evils of poor use of the environment. So are doing matters for improving water, improving air, improving energy consumption. So I think that's more in the spirit of Francis, where rather than the church being there and shaking his finger, no, you're bad, we're not going to put money with you, or we're going to take money with you so we can, in the stockholder meeting, tell you bad, negative screening makes an approach, but I think Francis urges us to work with and putting our money where good things are happening, and say, I dedicate my money to positive impact, to efforts that improve the lot of the poor, or to improve our environment. I find a lot of the poor a challenging one because I don't want to make money off the poor. But I think models like microfinancing and other models similar might be ways for us to do that. But the question was more on the environment, so I diverge.
I wonder if you could break open a little bit more this whole thing on socially responsible investing, using our assets on behalf of something, and not just using our assets or making asset decisions based on restrictions, but based on positive outcomes. But also, as the superior of my congregation, there's a great tension when my responsibility is to call forth that personal poverty of sisters. And yet to say to them, we're going to use our temporal goods and give this much money to the High Commission on Immigrants in the UN or something like that. So I wonder how you get a congregation on board about some of these things. We're small, and we may have a poverty of sisters, but we do not in any way have a poverty of temporal goods. But people, sisters, have been continually told not to spend, not to spend, not to spend. And how do you make a praxis shift about sponsored institutions and not being decided solely on finances, but that finances is only one piece of it? and that we should be deciding much more on charismatic impact and effectiveness as an institution of evangelization.
I'm going to summarize this just a moment, just in case we're
Because
not
I missed the
getting on
question.
the webinar. No, for the sake of those on the webinar. And correct me if I haven't represented it. But we do have a question regarding the use of institutional goods in terms of money when in a circumstance when the institute may be poor of members, but well off regarding finances. And when a superior or a choice is made to fund a certain organization, when the sisters individually are asked to not spend or to save, preserve, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a dichotomy, it seems, that's being expressed between the individual expression of poverty and the institutional. Is that correct? Okay.
Well, first of all, I think when you get into social responsibility, you can't do it perfectly. There's just no way to do it. I mean, you gotta decide on something. You're not gonna be able to do everything perfectly. So I think we gotta let go of that. You're not gonna have the perfect system. I think the call of the church is you gotta have some principle of social responsibility in the use of your assets. And we may be 70 different principles here, 70 different, but we choose to use our resources in some way, maybe not all of it, part of it, to that goal. But let me then go to your question. When you say to the sisters, we tell them, live simply, live simply, live simply. But then you finish it because who? She said the answer was so others can happen. But I think that's where this global kind of thing is, that if this living simply so others may have more, people have to be able to buy into the community's apostolic or priorities that we have all agreed upon. And then we are living so that our local surplus may be used in these three priorities. First, maybe to help our struggling apostolates. Secondly, to help a ministry that is close to the charism of the community with which you want to make a commitment. And thirdly, because the environment has been identified as one that we will give to international concerns. But they have to trust the community to have established priorities and are administering its surpluses. And I'm living simply because my surplus, that which I have allowed to be available for the use of others beyond my local community, fit to that, and I share that common mission. I think that motivates me. If I live simply and send the money to the province office, and there's no kind of indication of how they're using those resources, and I see the provincial in the car, and I say, no, wait a minute, how is that articulated? It comes back to this transparency thing again. We have to be transparent about our priorities. We have to be transparent on how we are allocating our assets and how we're using our assets. We struggle in our community with solidarity and formation. And so, is to ask the overfunded or those in particular that could live less and less, so those may have more. But the internet allows us to get into easy comparison of lifestyles. And so those in training in Asia see how those that are training in Boston and suddenly, well, they can have this, why can't I have this? So our lifestyle is not global. And the internet wants to make our lifestyles kind of like the same. I can see what they're doing in other parts of the world. No, my lifestyle has to be appropriate to the culture that I lived in. We have had the experience at times where those in training live better than the rest of the members of the province. And so that builds then a kind of a sense of a lack of appropriate understanding of what is appropriate lifestyle for me, living simply in my own culture. and how those assets are appropriately. Why should I save money so they can live better in another part of the world than their brothers and sisters do? Does that get at some of the questions? You know? I mean, that the social responsibility thing is also this big guilt cloud that's hanging over our heads, you know, in terms of, well, are we doing enough? Well, you're not. No one's doing enough. But are we doing something that we're all behind?
There was a third dimension of the question. You got the first two, thank you. The third is our provinces. There are many sponsored institutions that are under our responsibility. But many, many times the provinces are driven by which mission is economically functioning and not necessarily which mission is charismatically functioning. And I'm wondering how we hope to get a praxis change in that so that economics is one dimension that is used in making decisions about the future of any given institution.
The question presented now has to do with congregation or province-sponsored missions being evaluated from the perspective of finance rather than charism, and how this dichotomy can be addressed.
Do you think that has something to do with poverty? Are we off topic? You know, in one sense, it's with the allocation of people, certainly, you know, in terms of where we put people. You know, holding an apostolate to be faithful to the charism by which it was founded is a challenge, you know. And frequently, you know, when the economics become dominant, you know, it's to be able to market us in such a way that we get more students, or that way that we build. So, you know, we get excited about those schools that are more faithful to our own charism. You know, maybe I can get at it going in another way. In some places, you know, we leave the apostolates off scot-free. In other words, an apostolate is somewhat protected, and they don't have to contribute to the needs of the congregation. So, you know, the apostle pays the community lives off of what it has, and so on and so forth, and then the community has excess and it sends it off to the province of the congregation center. But I'm beginning to say, if you want to be a member of our club, it costs. If you want to be a member of our club, if you want to use our name, there might just be one more sister there, or one more brother working in your school, but you want to use our name. And we're going to support you by, you know, communal services or projects we have that keep on focusing on the charism of our community, be it for a school or for a hospital, and we invest in it. And if you want to use this name and help us with that, there's a cost. Well, I think that will raise the charism question in a lot of institutions. Well, why should I pay? Well, I mean, you're just holding on to this romantic notion that you were once a school with the name X on it, or you once were a hospital that held my name, and you know, but you do whatever you want with it. So that's another way of putting a little push to those institutions where you have a question about their charismatic identity. But I think you have to be equal, even to the ones that are aligned with the charism. And then to say, you know, if we are all in the same club, and we are all global in our cooperation with it, then it's not going to be strange to say to the members of the club that you also share that obligation of helping with your excesses, those of our apostolates that are struggling. Now you're going to get pushback from your CEOs who say, well, this money has been given to us for this purpose, this hospital or for this school. But I say, yeah, and to be a hospital or to be a school or an institution, the name of this means that I do this. I share with the needy of the club, of the congregation. For our students in our schools to know that, we're not alone, but we also share with the responsibility of schools of a given charism beyond just the school. And we live with less because that's what the religious of our community do. I mean, the trickle down kind of keeps on going and going beyond just what we do in our religious life. But we can inspire in the institutions the way our institutions live, that kind of skill. We are obligated either to receive the assistance we've got with honor and respect, or we are obligated, because we are a member of this family, to live with less or to make sacrifices for the good of others. The part of our fundraising we dedicate to those that are in need. But again, the larger congregation has to start building trust and confidence that the allocation of these resources are appropriately given. And, we're brand new at this. We're brand new at this because we don't have the experience of the structures. Everyone push back and say we're not a multinational corporation. Excuse me. We are. We are. Now, we don't like to be called a multinational because they have bad images. One would be Nestle. However, judge the line, finding God in all things. There are good things in multinational corporations. They have found ways of controlling and promoting the brand. We can learn from that. They have also found ways of reallocating assets. We're taking our assets from this part of the world and we're going here because it's what's good for the future of this multinational. But we're afraid to go there. We're business. That's business, we're ministry. Yeah, I'll then go back to the monastery, living in the country, living off the grapes and the apples that come from the orchard. But we can't do that. If we're going to be religious in the world, apostolic, and responding to people around us who are already moving in that direction, we got to get religious life on board with it.
If I may, because this is, we have two things emerging here. One is the very new reality of individuals in the Institute wanting the Institute to be accountable to us, whereas we've always had the members being accountable to the Institute in terms of poverty. The second thing I hear emerging is something that came up. When the need for finances may become exploitation, either at the institutional level, from what I'm hearing from this, where the need for money becomes the reason for maintaining or moving into certain areas. But there's also an exploitation that we see taking place regarding individual members, which came into the public eye not too long ago. So when the question then is, when does that the financial need of an institute then become exploitation, perhaps either of the institute or the personal dignity of one of its members?
So when you're talking about are you talking about the institute of the congregation or the institute of the specific apostle?
Of the congregation, I think would be the.
No, I mean, the major financial, if I look at my own country's personal history, the major financial contribution of religious communities was not money, it was bodies. I mean, that was the currency, that if we put X number of religious at an institution and, they lived locally and not that much and so on and so forth, then the institution survived. now, in one sense, that model can still continue where, I have abundant vocations in one part of the world, and I use them to keep another structure alive in a world that is diminishing. Now, that's got to relate also to the apostolic priorities. If the whole congregation has bought into it, that we are going to keep, kindergartens open in Rome, and so we're going to bring everybody to Rome because that's a priority of the congregation. Well, then you do it. But if it is an unreflected kind of, well, if we got to keep these convents open and there's a surplus here, is it really allowing ourselves to be as available to the needs of the world as we're looking at it around us? And, is that poverty? Is that obedience? Is that, I think it's all kind of comes together in this in terms of a community's approach to religious life and being available to the mission of the church. I think this document on the economy of the service, the charism mission raises that question several times throughout in terms of how we make decisions and how we do that appropriately in terms of the charism and when is the time to work together with others to keep the charism alive as we find other congregations with similar charisms. All of that comes as a part of it.
Bernadette, did you have a question? Oh.
Yes, I did have a question.
I hope it wasn't a technical thing. Just kidding, that's it.
When you were talking, two things struck me. First, the importance of mission integration. And I'm thinking that it's not just for sisters or priests or brothers without poverty, but for all of our lay collaborators who are co-sponsors in the mission, that the more we do mission integration together, and that there's an understanding and shared vision of the charism, then we get creative ideas from everyone about how we can go forward. And everyone's coming up with ideas of how to allocate the resources. And for me, it's a great movement away from that sense of secrecy and stinginess, because it calls for the transparency of saying what our resources are and how we need to use it. So it's just this point of mission integration that just became very powerful within the mission we're talking.
Right. But the other part of that thing is the struggle is that the laymen and women have not taken about poverty. And yet they want to work with us and collaborate with us. And so when I go back to the role, and we have many laymen and women who do work with us, who embrace our mission, may be motivated by our spirit of living with less, but their obligations are different. They have priorities to their spouses, to their children, and we have to be able to respect that. And yet they can be, and often I think, a better and a stronger voice to call us to be faithful to our charism and to our spirit. We frequently rile when one of our brothers or sisters says, well, I think we're supposed to be doing it this way, But if a layman or woman looking at us from outside and say, well, aren't you supposed to be, we get called up a little bit more. And I think that's the charism and the freedom that I think we can experience from laymen and women who are truly brought into our planning and our decision making to make it cooperative, and I think it keeps us alive. I mean, I've seen laymen and women who've become directors of our works who are far more articulate of our charism. But maybe I'm getting in trouble for saying this, but there is a conflict of interest in terms of income. We have two different goals with regards to income, and sometimes that can make things difficult.
Any other questions from the floor or the web?
Yeah, I
Okay,
have.
we have one from the web.
Our online followers are very active. So I have another question from Rosaline. The general and province government regularly prepare the sisters for other ministries like teaching, nursing, etc. But preparing sisters for financial management needs to be taken care too.
A statement or a question?
Yeah. It's a statement.
It's a statement. Well, I want to go back. I mean, it's the priorities of your congregation. You know, I mean, in the past, we have asked, well, I think we still do. We ask religious to kind of come and pay the bills. You know, go to the bank. You know, work with the, okay. But in terms of the priorities of the congregation, is that the best use of a woman that we have prepared in our spirituality to minister to? And is it more appropriately the charism of a layman or woman who have developed these skills and can assist us in ministry so that our religious, it comes back to what's the priority of the use of the religious that we have? In terms of, being a man or woman who wanted to dedicate themselves to the service of the church. Now, you may decide that this person, given their skills and their personality, that's the best place to keep them in an office and, not near any people. We have those people in our communities, But I think it's a prioritization. But what do you need in the treasurer? You need someone who, again, can advise the major superior in terms of how we take our values and use them in our ecclesiastical goods that we've been given for the good of the ministry of the congregation. How you train them, and I agree with that statement, sure, we need to train people like that. But I think we can be creative in that, in terms of how we can do that. Question.
It doesn't work.
It's a hard question. She had to get her notes.
Not really. I'm just going back to the idea resources of the congregation are meant to foster the mission of the institute. While Sister is sharing there, she said something of the practice of secrecy and stinginess. And for me, this kills the spirit of the mission. I was just like asking myself, let us go to the root cause. What is making people to be secretive? And what is causing this stinginess?
Right.
Again, for those on the web, we have a question regarding what might be the root cause behind stinginess and secrecy being perceived on the part of those who administer the goods of congregations.
Sometimes it's insecurity. I've asked someone to do a job for which they're poorly prepared, and we force them to learn on the job. Frequently, they're very much afraid. And you start asking questions, and they get defensive, and so you stop asking questions because they've just been being, okay, I'm paying the bills and it's getting done, and no, we can't afford this, we don't afford this, because they're doing the day in, day out kind of watching the money go up and down, and they become worried. I think that's one reason where I think we have found in a lot of people a hesitancy to be able to communicate and to do long-range thinking. When we come to the personal poverty, I always say the two things, in our own tradition, we have the manifestation of conscience, where an individual Jesuit meets with the provincial, kind of talks about everything that's going on. The provincial, can ask questions, but I keep on saying the two questions that the provincials never want to ask about, it's money and sex. They just don't want to talk about it because they're uncomfortable, because they don't know what to ask and what to talk about. Because again, they've come out of a tradition, at least in the context of finances, Well, they feel insecure. What do I ask? But if what I have is, I hold is of the communities, then I have no right to secrecy on it. If I have a credit card, the credit card is for me to use the community's resources. And I should not have any reason to hide my credit card bill from a superior. Or that I have bank accounts. Because, and I'm talking about mine in the context of violent poverty, you may have a different legal structure. But if what I have and what I receive is always in the name of the community, it is for the use of the community, then there should be openness. Now, how you begin that? I mean, it also is trust, you know. If I let them know what I have, that means because I'm trusting that everybody else is doing the same, and that we are all using money appropriately according to the common life that we've agreed on. And we're all designed to live simply. And that doesn't mean we're all spending the same amount of money, but because Sister X has this responsibility and these tasks, she may need more money for that. And that doesn't mean I have a right to that. Those are difficult conversations because it's that tension between the individual and the community. So I think a lot of things are going on there. We're talking about treasurers being stingy and secretive. A lot of times it may be a power thing. Secondly, it may be because they are insecure in the jobs that they've done and they're just basically managing, and you ask them larger questions and they feel incompetent to be able to respond. And then thirdly, on the individual level, I mean, it's just an ongoing building of trust, and from the get-go saying we are open about all of our finances. I say to my brothers in parts of the world that are not used to credit cards, I said, you're going to have to get used to them because the world's going to be all credit card at one point. And there are real dangers involved if we haven't begun to practice in the use of credit cards in a sense of transparency and openness. It's not my private kind of little account. It's the community's resources that you're using those times. And there's dangers there, the dangers of various dependencies that can go unknown if one doesn't see those things. So, does that help? Does it respond to all the questions you have there?
Yeah, but
Oh, she's coming. She's coming. The microphone is approaching.
I was asking, looking also at missioning in other parts of the institute, looking at other provinces, how this manifestation could be interpreted.
How it could be
Interpreted. Imagine this practice was being done by other parts of the congregation, the other provinces. Yeah, what could be the cause to this?
Well, again, it's the tradition of the provinces. You know, my experience is that we have some provinces that have huge amount of assets that they've never reported. It's usually not evil intent. It just never was done, and they never thought about having to include it in their records because you had, you know, a treasurer. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you like that? I mean, so sometimes it's just simply that, you know, that you've got, you know, mistake that just kind of carries on and on and on. Or one time it got approved but never found itself in records, and yet there's funds there that could be used for different. So that's one way it is. And that builds mistrust within the congregation because, oh, this province is hiding this money from the general superior. And they don't think they're hiding it. This is the way we've been managing it forever. So that's why, you know, that openness and transparency helps us tear down those patterns of being secret and stingy. The stinginess is another question. You know, if the congregation, I mean, in the past we told them, it's your job, you survive. And so, all right, we're surviving. And now we're doing pretty well. But we never said survive and then share. And it's adding that kind of concept to the global nature of our vocation. You know, in my congregation, we talk about the global nation, and everyone says, oh yeah, I could be sent to everywhere in the world. Well, that's wonderful and romantic. But global part of our vocation involves also, I think, now to our vow of poverty. Our vow of poverty is not local, it's global. I participate in the global macro dynamics of my community and how I live and my resources are, that word our or my community, that word our is no longer local. It's no longer local. Our resources, we always think of the community's resources. No, it's the congregation's resources. And how can the congregation use our resources for our mission?
And it seems now that the church is saying that it's not only congregational, but ecclesiastical.
Exactly.
And we do have a question regarding that. It was proposed in Italian, so I'm going to read it in Italian, and then I'm going to interpret it. If the person is here who expressed this question, if I don't interpret it correctly, if you can let me know. Cos'è che la valorizzazione immobiliare per I beni immobili ecclesiastici destinati a opere di carità? What I think this question is referring to is the part in the recent document on the economy at the service of the charism, when it states that the immovable goods that religious congregations hold are ecclesiastical goods destined for the works of charity. Does someone here recognize this question? No, okay. I think that they're asking about what that means.
Well, my sense from the congregation, has been involved in different meetings with them, is that the property of religious congregation is primarily to support the charism of the congregation. And my impression, in terms of a lot of the motivation for this document is to protect the religious charisms from the bishops. No, I mean, to be honest. I mean, and so therefore, because the bishops are seeing this property and it's something that, they want to have for the institution, they're looking out for the local church. But the role of the congregation is to protect the charisms that communities have had, and are there ways we can continue to promote that charism? So as you're planning for the future of the resources of a congregation that's getting smaller and smaller, the conclusion isn't that it doesn't go to the local church automatically, but we seek to continue to use that resources to promote that charism for which it was originally intended. So that, involves more planning and thinking. This document that just came out a couple of days ago on contemplative communities, asking them to all be a part of a federation, is a part of that, I think. It's trying to say to them, don't die. Be a part of something larger. And as you're a part of something larger, can we promote this charism? Because it's not just you locally. The more we find ourselves together in preserving that charism, be it a contemplative life or whatever, we will preserve these for the church. Let's not get it just a number game and look at dying.
Could you say something more about our resources that are meant for the service of the charism, and then the idea of ecclesiastical goods? I think I'm confused when it comes to
Bene ecclesiastes.
Bene ecclesiastes.
But you are one. No, I think I don't get into a division here. What we hold are the goods of the church. So the assets of a religious community are assets of the church, but we have been given them to manage them under our own charisms. Now, if at some point we can't manage them anymore, or we cannot find it a way for it to be managed with others of a similar charism, we don't sell it and give the money away. It belongs to the church and ultimately to the pool. So, you know, all of the assets of our religious community are bene ecclesiastici. And to alienate them from the church, to give it away, is something the church wants to be involved in, because you're acting in the name of the whole church. And this congregation would always ask questions. Well, how are you using it faithful to your congregation's character? So if you're going to alienate it and give the money, you know, say I'm going to sell this parish and I'm going to give it, you know, to a bus company. Well, how is a bus company, you know? But I'm going to give it to this orphanage that is caring for children, much in the way our community has done that, in the spirit of community similar to ours. You know, it is still staying in terms of the service of the poor. That's the message of the church.
Following up on this, I'll ask one more question and then we'll close with the floor, okay? This understanding that all of our goods are ecclesiastical goods also would then apply to the money that we possess. And there were some questions regarding management of resources in terms of maintaining the necessary patrimony for the life of the sisters and the mission of the congregation, but also the institutions in which we place liquid assets in order to be invested, etc. If these are ecclesiastical goods, what is the ethics behind the management of patrimony and finances when we're involving third-party institutions such as banks and other organizations?
Well, we're never exempted from preaching the gospel. We're always obligated to preach the gospel. So as we engage in commerce with other financial or any institution, you know, we should be free to raise the values of the gospel in those situations. Again, nobody's going to ever be able to, when we're talking about human institutions, none of them are perfect expressions of gospel values. But we can certainly move them towards those just as much as not. I know when money managers kind of come in and talk to me, they don't want to do this anymore because, you know, they're not going to ask me. I said, well, what do you stand for? Well, we'll make money out of it. Fine, but you know what? Oh, you want SRI, you know, social SRI. I mean, it's all those standard lines that they toss to religious, you know, just to keep us happy. Oh, we have a social responsibility. No. What does your company stand for? What are the values that empower you to be good people in your company? Where do you allow? Well, I think those kinds of conversations are the way we engage, perhaps, in financial institutions. That we don't want to give your money, but we want to know that we are, important for us is that we are working with institutions that have values that guide them beyond just making money. And, you know, the facile answers that they can give us because, oh, they have a social responsible investment fund, this should be happy, and, you know, goodbye. I once was grilling my nephew who's now working for J.P. Morgan. I said, what does J.P. Morgan stand for? Uncle Tom, we make money. Oh, it all comes from Uncle Tom, we do this. So I finally said to me, Uncle Tom, J.P. Morgan's not for you. So get off my back. But I've done the same thing with the managers who come to talk to me. I get the deer in the headlights because they're not used to the value question. But as they engage us, and they know that there are value-based people out there that want to know what you stand for and what are the moral fibers of the companies that you are in. And then I used my brother who worked for General Motors, and I said to my nephew, look, General Motors hid the whole problem of the airbag or some kind of thing, the ignition that, you know, they just all kind of hid. And I said, where is the culture that encouraged people to say, that's not just and we shouldn't do it? Where are the values? So I think those are some ways that we engage, not just by giving money, but when we sit down with the people with whom we work. We have to find the rhetoric of religious language in the secular world in a way that it's not the church saying, you're bad, Jesus telling you to do this, and you're not doing so bad. But engage in the healthy conversations that proclaim the gospel.
Do we have any questions from our web audience?
Yes, I have a couple, like a mixture between statement, comment, and question.
That gives me freedom.
Today, congregations are concerned with how to become self-sustaining and might end up investing heavily, like in real estate. Some ladies question the rationale behind this in connection to what they think of the wow poverty. Please comment. And the second one, sister, the sales. In the past, each unit of the congregation was financially independent. What they had was independent. What they had was for them to use. Some have been asked to help other units for specific needs. Do you have any suggestions for helping to change their mentality so all see that the resources belong to the congregation and not just to the province or region?
Okay, there's another hour's worth of questions there. So, real estate, people in the office, in my office, get mad because I'm not a big fan of real estate investment. I mean, everybody sees religious as having money, so we're going to get people kind of coming at us and say, sister, have I got a deal for you? You invest in this real estate project and so forth, and we'll give you a 16% return. And you're going, I got all this money back and so like that. But we put ourselves at risk because then we become managers of property, we become landlords, we become vow religious who give appearance of avarice, and basically we have a poor history of managing property of our own. You know, poverty has led us to kind of say, no, I'm not going to repair the building, I'm not going to paint it this year, no, I'm not going to repair the roof, and so on, so because I'm saving money. So we don't have a good experience with that. So, and sometimes developers take us for granted, kind of saying, well, if you give me this money, we'll do that, and then we get into bad practices. So I'm not sure that this is responding to the question that came on the web, but I think we have to be very careful on the image that we have and as people who are involved in real estate investments. That's something to be third party, involving in some kind of cooperative where we can participate, but not be out managers, but also not being seen as landlords or whatever. Now there's some places where we do have our own businesses. I mean, we have places that have farms that produce money to support our houses and so on and so forth. I don't see that as a real estate process as it is investment, as it is a way of seeking income to support our lives, especially in impoverished rural areas. I hope that responds to the question of the person in the webinar. Finally, I think the question in terms of these financially independent groups and trying to convince them to participate in something larger brings us back to, I think, where we started. It's a long-term project of, if you buy into the model I'm presenting, to do this structural and institutional and mindset shift from local to global, that what I do here in Italy does have an effect elsewhere in the world, and because I'm a human being, part of the global society, but be, and even more so because I'm a member of a community that is more global, and because I'm a follower of Christ, and if I want to be a part of this community, I want to make sure that the resources that I have are available for the priorities of the church. And that's the transparency and the openness and the development of structures where we are communally convinced that we are managing well our surpluses, our resources for the priorities of the congregation, which I believe ultimately would be for the needy. And how you define needy, the needy could be the ignorant, it could be those who come to us for education so they can make a difference for others. It can be the uncared for sick and the impoverished that we find on the streets. And the definition is wide. But if we're consistent in defining the need and how we want to use our resources for it, and say
for the rest of the world, we're living more simply so that we have resources to help those that need. I think the world will say, well, I could do that too.
I hope the world is. I hope evangelical witness has an effect, and I think we believe that because of the vows.
Are there any further questions from the floor? Anche se può chiedere in italiano
O in spagnolo.
o in spagnolo.
Or tedesco.
Ah,
Deutsch, I mean.
fantastic.
Okay, I promised there wouldn't be another question, but there actually is one in my conclusion, so excuse me for having. No, and that question actually has to do with, may I borrow your copy of Economy at the Service? Because I forgot to bring one. The question has to do with how this can be obtained. And unfortunately, I think the question came from someone on the web. However, we do have copies available in the back in English, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. However, I'm pretty positive that the Vatican is the only one that has published it so far. I believe the Paulines in Kenya are publishing it, but I have no date as to when it might be available there. Generally, these documents are also made available in India through the Paulines, and in other parts of the world also through Paulini. I have not seen any other in English. Unfortunately, in the western part of the world, I have not seen a publisher who will be making it available. And unfortunately, it's not available online. No. However, good old Amazon, you can usually get copies through them, although I don't usually suggest that we use Amazon. However, one of those things, right? Okay. And for any of you who would like to revisit this presentation at a later date, or for any of you who may suggest that another member of your congregation take a look at it, it will be posted, if I'm not mistaken, on YouTube at a certain point.
Yes.
And we will be sending an email to all of you who registered for either the live or the webinar presentation with that link. And you are free to pass that link on. Anyway.
And this other document that came
That's
out
right.
yesterday from the congregation, the document of faith and the Cassidy for Promoting Human Intervention is available online. So, I mean, and I think we have to start pushing our congregation. I mean, they put the whole document on contemplative light. That was online. You can download that. But they didn't do this one, which they want to be a major impact in terms of how we administer. So every time you stop by and say, why isn't this how I was, it may kind of hit the idea. So it doesn't make sense to me either.
So that brings us to the conclusion of this particular conversation on the vow of poverty in the macro global world. There will be others down the line, so keep your eye on the UISG English group. There hopefully will be one in October. There may be, October is still up in the air, whether it will be on discernment or the new document on new wine. And we will have someone on discernment, even if we need to reschedule. And we are trying to get Mary Johnson to give us something on the book that should be published next year. And we're also in touch with a sister, Judette Galares. We hope to see if she might present on ongoing conversion. So these are some of the upcoming topics. And we do hope to send a survey out a little later this year, maybe in the summer, so that we get some more feedback from you, so that we make sure that the presentations that we offer are the topics that you would like to see covered. Thank you so much for coming. We hope to see you again.